Hello, my name's Dave and I'm on the team at Super Spin Digital, creators of Spin Rhythm XD. Let me just start by saying it is a massive honor and a pleasure to have been asked to speak at ChinaJoy GDC. We are just giving you a broad overview of the development process of our game. So we're going to just cover a wide range of things and hopefully as many people can get something out of it as possible. So what is Spin Rhythm XD? I can kind of talk about it all day, but I find it's just way easier to show a video. So let's go. So what is it? Spin Rhythm XD is a movement-based electronic music rhythm game featuring smooth controls, beautiful reactive backgrounds, and fully handmade levels. That's our kind of elevator pitch. So the game's part puzzle game, part traditional rhythm game, and part flow. It's made by Super Spin Digital, that's us, 5 guys, 5 friends from Melbourne, Australia, former Half-Bit game developers, 3 of us. So that's the team that worked on Fruit Ninja, Jetpack Joyride, and so on. And it's out now on Steam. It's $20 US, currently on sale. It's coming to Switch late 2021. So why did we make this game? What's the history behind this game? So I'm going to tell this kind of from an Australian perspective of what happened with rhythm gaming here. So in around 2005, Guitar Hero got really big, got massive. That's when I think Guitar Hero 3 came out, or maybe that's when the first Guitar Hero came out, and it just exploded. Everyone was playing it. Everyone loved it. Plastic guitars everywhere. Everyone's house had a set. And in the following years, you know, we got a lot of Guitar Hero, Rock Band games, spin-offs, Beatles, Aerosmith, and it was like our first kind of big mainstream taste of rhythm gaming. We had DDR in the arcades. That was pretty big. And a few games, I think Guitar Freaks and 2DX, but they weren't in the mainstream. They were very much kind of niche hardcore games and very unapproachable to the average player. And Guitar Hero really just brought it into everyone's house. In 2007, I think Rock Band came out. Rock Band 1 was extremely expensive. It cost us like hundreds and hundreds of dollars just to play Rock Band. Between that and like oversaturation, it just really kind of, I would say, crashed and burned at that point. Very sad. I actually saw this on the side of the road. It made me very sad a few years ago. It was kind of poignant though, because we're starting to make Spin Rhythm at the time, and it felt like we were kind of just trying to make something that was way more accessible and didn't require any kind of crazy gear or anything. So in Australia, we don't really have that many arcades. As I said, like they're kind of more parlor games, ticket machines, Daytona if you're lucky. Sometimes they're very far away because we're very geographically sparse. As time went on, mobile gaming started to get bigger, became more casual, and our artist Sharth was, working on Fruit Ninja, and just the real tactile feel of being able to engage with, touching the screen and the kind of feedback you get from that inspired him to start working on prototypes for puzzle games involving spinning a wheel. At the time, it was never intended to be a rhythm game, but I think as Sharth was shifting the perspectives and that kind of thing, so going from side on to vertical, it started to look more and more like a rhythm game. And eventually it just was kind of inevitable to try and sync the puzzle game to music. And it's like, oh, it looks like we got a new rhythm game on our hands. After a long journey of many prototypes and a lot of experimenting, we finally released on Steam in early access. So that was in 2019. And just recently on mobile. And we're aiming for Switch in late 2021. So you can see here the original prototype in the top left. So it was very tactile, very wooden, very much a puzzle game, very mobile looking. The visuals kind of were experimented with a bit, became very much more digital. And the center one, you can see that actually was still a horizontal prototype, but I flipped it up just to show the transition and the moving from 3 colors to 2 in the second last frame. And in the last frame, it's moved to 2 colors, but split down the middle of the wheel. So there's smaller wedges, which means there's more motion. And yeah, you can see the graphical evolution as well. So really the core mechanics of the game, it really involves music and motion together. We want to use gesture and flow as much as traditional rhythm game elements, just to create a new feeling of playing music. And it was purely accidental, I think, that it turned out to work so well. I think a lot of games, when you get started, you can plan to have this great idea, but honestly, so many accidents happen, experiments happen, that we never set out to really make this kind of new feeling rhythm game. It's just happened to be a coincidence of just, matching a puzzle game to music. So just remember that you got to experiment to find the good stuff a lot of the time. It was always designed to be accessible for beginners, but, eventually have a very high skill ceiling for experts and tournament players especially. We didn't want it to require expensive controllers other than a mobile initially, and just single-handed play, very simple. The gameplay has ended up revolving around building tension with note patterns, color swapping, complicated kind of combinations of movement and taps, and then releasing that tension with a spin, which auto aims to the next note, as you can see in the GIF. So you can really kind of go crazy and then release all of that tension. It feels extremely satisfying, and it maintains the flow of the target of where the note's meant to be. So I think the reason this is so successful is because it mirrors the way music's actually composed. So most music is composed with, rhythmic or melodic or harmonic tension that's built up, and then it's released in various ways. In electronic music, it's really quite obvious how that is. So there's literally build-ups all the time and complications in the music, and then releases, big kind of noisy releases. And that's just part of the ebb and flow of dance music. And it works really well from a game design perspective with a lot of electronic music. Because it follows such rigid patterns, there's a lot to latch onto, a lot of repetition to help with learning, and just satisfying patterns that build up and then release with a spin. Yeah, it works quite well with electronic music. In terms of how you control the game, we have official support for keyboard and mouse. So just any controller that moves left and right, essentially, and has a button to tap, that will work with Spin Rhythm. We support gamepad as well, just because you have to. It's not really a true experience of that kind of analog wheel motion, but with gyro, it can feel really good, giving you that sense of momentum. Otherwise, it's just analog sticks left and right and buttons to tap. Still really fun to play. And at some point, we decided to support actual DJ MIDI controllers. We were preparing for PAX 2017 in Australia. That's Penny Arcade Expo, a big gaming expo. We've just had a Pioneer CDJ set of decks, and they were ridiculously expensive decks. They were I think around $1,000 or something AUD. And we thought, let's just try and get it working for PAX. It could be a real spectacle. And it turned out to be really fun because the wheel had a lot of weight and a lot of momentum, and just kind of the novelty of playing with DJ decks it kind of feels like what DJ Hero was trying to be. It's more in the vein of an old-fashioned rhythm action game like Guitar Hero, not becoming more of a sim like DJ Hero. But yeah, pure accident. Ended up using a Unity plugin called MIDI Jack, which helps you read MIDI input from any kind of attached MIDI device. And then we just map the velocity to, spin left and spin right, map those motions. Any additional button could be a tap or wheel tap for the tap notes, and a separate button for the beats. And it's pretty awesome to play. And it kind of solves that problem of not having to manufacture a plastic equipment. You can use a real piece of MIDI DJ gear and not kind of just be creating plastic landfill. You can use that gear to actually, DJ properly. Post Malone apparently got into guitar from Guitar Hero. So if we can, find the next Mark Ronson or something from playing Spoon Rhythm, that'd be pretty sick. Honestly, like the DJ controls could have been the hook for the entire game, but they kind of came into play about halfway through development. I think it could have been like, this is a game you play with DJ controls, and it could have been successful anyway. But, we've just decided to support a million different controls, and that's just one of them. In order for it to work, though, we had to design a mapping system that was versatile enough that it worked for any MIDI device, even ones we'd never like physically had a hold of. So it's actually been quite remarkable that it has worked so well. So many people have just tried their decks, plugged them in, mapped them using our in-game mapping, and it's worked, and it's just so good. I've got a really horrible story actually about that. When we were doing PAX in Seattle in USA, my luggage got lost or stolen or whatever between Gamescom in Cologne and then the flight to Seattle. My luggage disappeared. And so we had 2 days before PAX started. We had to just go to a music shop and just buy the decks that you see there. So the photo was actually from PAX in Seattle. And just plug it in and just pray that it worked. And it actually did. It was crazy. We're just like, okay, we know we're pretty confident now in this MIDI mapping. It's if that kind of situation can unfold and we can come out on top. So I want to spend a little bit of time now to talk about the difficulty curve. It's important to teach players how to play it really effectively. And the difficulty curve is something that we've worked really hard on. It's something that's important to a lot of games. So hopefully you can take something away from our process. We basically treat the whole game as a tutorial for itself. This means keeping track of what players have learnt up until that point, assuming they play through every level in order. You also need to have a great tutorial on top of that. Yeah, what we do is we keep track of everything players have learned, only introduce things one at a time, and reinforce it using repetition. So we do actually have 5 difficulty levels. So it became quite a mission to do 5 times the 41 tracks we have in the game and more in the future, making the curve smooth enough that players can get into the game and really enjoy it without running into too many humps. So tutorials are really tricky. Ours still isn't perfect, but it teaches players all the mechanics in a musical sense and isn't too punishing. But getting this right, really, it takes 3 times longer, we reckon, than the original amount of time we thought it would take, and we're still not happy with it. We're going to have to redo it again soon for Switch. It's going to need to be way different because PC players can kind of just like, jump into Discord and be like, hey, how do I do this thing? Whereas on console, it's just the player and the TV, and you have to really communicate everything clearly. Big part of the difficulty curve for us was cutting easy and normal and hard levels slightly short. We do it using Unity's inbuilt tools, but we can actually take, say, a dance track that's 5 minutes long. It might have 2 distinct halves, and you could actually just cut that in half and just fade in, fade out the front and back, and then you'd have a shorter level, 2.5 minutes. So that might be a good example of something working on easy and normal. Other more complicated tracks, we can actually cut sections out, repeat them if we need to, completely swap sections in and out. We can basically take any point of a clip of music and just set that as one clip, and then any other point to another point, that's another clip, and stitch them together, change the order. It's allowed for some really versatile kind of remixes of music to make sure that, a 5.5 minute long track isn't just overkill for an easy level, because we actually restrict the mechanics that are in the earlier difficulties in order to not overwhelm the player with too many mechanics. It's actually pretty controversial to do though, because people expect to just, play full length on any difficulty. But honestly, we've got 41 tracks at the moment, and more than half of them are 4 minutes or longer. And so some kind of cutting would be necessary. Dance tunes can get really long, or just EDM in general, but we don't want to exclude a track just because it's long. It might be really cool, but we could trim it down. Some of our tracks have really long versions. We've licensed them and got this like 5.5 minute master track. And it's like, hang on, the YouTube version was 2.5 minutes. It's like, oh, they did an edit for YouTube. So in our tools, we're actually able to redo that edit. So we're only using one audio file and have multiple cuts. It's pretty cool. A lot of our difficulty curve has been smoothed out using community feedback. So we've got an awesome Discord community. They're really into the game. They're really passionate. They're really willing to help as well. So my advice to help like balance difficulty in any game would just be cultivate feedback from your community. Build them on whatever platforms you're able to and just use them because they are happy to help. They love helping. They're usually awesome with details and spreadsheets and discussing problems and really understanding problems. It's just a massive resource you should use. So these are the actual gameplay elements we have in the game. So we like to introduce everything from our 5 difficulty levels in order of how difficult they are to do. So we have match notes, and these are just notes that you have to match the wheel to and the color wedge. You don't have to tap or do anything. It's just basic motion, and these are used in every difficulty level. They're like the bread and butter of just moving the wheel. Spins require you to move quickly with enough momentum to kind of trigger the spin, and they will always land and auto aim on the next note. So this is a big part of the kind of satisfaction factor of the game, is just having these spins and releases and then tapping in time. Scratch zones are just moving left and right quickly. They're quite lenient, but they just require you to do more than a single left and right motion. So these are the 3 kind of foundational mechanics that are in easy mode. And in the other difficulties, we include tap notes, which are just, you have to tap them, press a button, or lift your hand off the DJ wheel and tap again. Slide notes, which are tap and hold, pretty self-explanatory. It's combining motion and tapping. Beats and beat holds. This is actually a separate button. You can map it to the same hand if you're on mouse, but it's like introducing ambidextrous play. So all of a sudden you're kind of moving, matching colors with one hand and then doing these off beats on the other hand. They can be used for kicks or snares or a lot of things, actually, like big bass sounds and that kind of thing. It's really, really effective. Whenever we introduce new elements, we do it in isolation. So easy contains matches, spins, and scratches. It has no taps, only taps after spins. Normal starts to introduce slides and taps in isolation. Hard introduces beats in isolation. And then there's 2 difficulty levels above that. Expert kind of combines everything, and then XD combines everything with the most complicated color swapping. Probably the most difficult thing is the color swapping, honestly. Like, it looks simple, but it's hard to get your head around. And the beat hold, which is just holding the beat button and either letting it go or releasing in time. So here's a video of 5 difficulties at once. I'll just put it on loop and play it a couple of times. All right, so you can see in easy, you've just got the motion. Everything's just in isolation. It's very simple and very clear. Normal has those taps. They only ever appear in obvious places. There's very minimal color swapping again. It's only really obvious when the color swapping happens. Hard, you've got more kind of taps in isolation, more motion, more color swapping, and the beats only appear in isolation. So when nothing else is happening. Expert, starting to get a bit crazy, mixing beats with spins. A lot of color swapping, a lot of movement into taps, and just generally more of everything. XD just goes wild, beats and taps together, beat holds, just everything's happening. And the note speed is always slightly faster, so the speed at which the note's coming towards the player. They're always slightly faster per difficulty. So one of the biggest reasons we've been able to make our difficulty curve so smooth is just from collecting a lot of data. So we use spreadsheets, we play through levels all in a row and mark out any difficulty humps, mark out why there are difficulty humps, keep track of when elements are introduced. It's very easy to just kind of go in and play a level and just tweak it. But I reckon you should always be tweaking something with a reason. You need to make sure you're not doing work over and over again based on however you feel in the moment. Because, at the start of the day, you might not be warmed up. You might be playing pretty badly. You might think something's harder than it is. Later in the day, you might be, just in the zone, playing really well. It's like, oh, that's easy. I'll just make that harder and harder. It's really best just to use data, honestly. It's great to have a paper trail of everything, know when all of your gameplay elements are introduced, know how many times they've been reiterated, that kind of thing. So on the right, we have a chart from our Discord users just marking all of the weird issues in levels. They're extremely good at finding them and logging them, and it just makes your life so much easier having it all marked out. The GIF on the left is from when we recently played through every single level in a row. So starting from easy, all of the easies, through to all of the XDs, and just marking all the difficulty humps, why they are humps, and how they've been smoothed out. And whether that smoothing out means re-rating it to a more difficult rating or actually changing the content of the level itself. Oh, this was another data collection set. All of our actual in-game ratings on the left. And then the next column is our community voted what they felt like they should be rated. And then we've got the difference in the standard deviation, just so you can see where the biggest disparities are. And this was really helpful in re-rating all of our charts to be more appropriate. So you can just play a chart and know you're playing something that is, an appropriate level for where you're at. So I want to talk about how we create the illusion of flying through space rather than actually flying through space. We've got this football-shaped world, so you can't quite see it in this shot, but it's actually kind of a stretched out sphere rather than a rounded sphere. So imagine you just kind of rolled it out like a rolling pin. This means that the horizon is curved much more aggressively than on a sphere. If you're on a sphere, it's very flat. And if you want to get the right curve for the sides versus the front, you just kind of have to bend it a bit. We have 3D objects like the crystals. They're all placed procedurally. They just generate themselves and destroy themselves as they're needed. And we have the terrain as well. Behind, you can see it kind of destroying itself, and at the front, it's creating itself, all procedurally as well. We have this horizon object. So we use planets or pyramids or like these bright red ribbons you can see at the end of where the ship is. They're actually quite close to the player, but they're just moving in lockstep, so they appear really far away. There's a fog system that uses a giant ball of fog. We use a pixel shader, and it actually casts a ray which calculates how much atmosphere the player should be passing through and the thickness of it. So I'll show you that in the next slide. That's pretty sick. So the point of all of these things together creates this sense of like moving through a world. But because it's all procedural, it means that tracks can go on for as long as they need to. You can have a track that's 7-8 minutes long, 30 minutes long. You'll always be moving somewhere. It's all done procedurally. If you got a track that's 30 seconds long, it's the same experience. You're still flying through this world, this very alive, reactive world, and you don't have to hand place anything or do anything like that. This is especially good because our difficulty levels are cut up, meaning that if you have a shorter level that's 1 minute, it'll be the same experience. So we use multiple cameras for a couple of things. It's pretty expensive to do this on mobile. It takes a huge resource hit, so it's not really recommended. But you can do a lot of cool things on PC. We've experimented with like blending backgrounds together. On mobile, we actually did have this portal system, so you could have a second background being rendered, and then the player would just like travel through this portal into a new background. It looked awesome, but it just used way too many resources, so we had to cut it. But you can do a lot of cool things with multiple cameras. I think one of the best things is if one of these crystals ever passes through, because the track is rendered on a different camera, the crystal will never pass over the notes. It will always appear like it's behind the track, even when it's like zooming right in front of you. You'll always be able to see the notes. So this is our spherical fog system. And you can see it's this like thick kind of volume of fog rendered at very low resolution, so it's very inexpensive. It looks way better than a gradient fog because no matter what angle you look at the world, you'll always get this kind of correct sense of kind of a volumetric fog. And it uses raycasting to calculate how much atmosphere the player is ever actually passing through at any given moment, and so how much to actually display. So a huge goal of our background system is making it modular, meaning you can sub in and out different effects and colors and objects and things very quickly. And so we end up using a few different things in our backgrounds. We've got these 3D floating elements, and these can be like crystals, or there's bubbles, or whatever you want, really. It's just a 3D model with a matte cap. These gates that you can see, those very thin light gates that are kind of the ship always passes through, which can be changed. The shape of those can be whatever you want. We've got the distant objects that we saw before, so like those ribbons. The skybox itself, which is a rotating cylindrical map. The fog, which we saw before, and then the ground, which is a segmented polygonal ground with, it's got a kind of height map, which I'll show you in a sec. It's kind of procedurally generated and reactive to the music. All of our elements, I think, use matte caps. We're really lucky we can. It's very simple, very cheap, and the lighting doesn't actually matter because we're always viewing the world from one perspective, which is that of the ship. We don't get to move around objects and see, some of that matte cap dodginess. It means we can get a lot of variety, a lot of recoloring really cheaply and really quickly. So all of our background objects wrap around the world. So I've actually in this GIF just shrunk the world very small to show you kind of the effect of like the wrapping, so that no matter what the size of the sphere is, which we can change, the experience will always largely be the same. You'll get a very different looking world, but the game won't be affected. So our 3D terrain effects, each type of note, so whether it's, matches, taps, beats, they all affect the world in a different way. And they're all additive as well. So it creates this kind of organic effect of like something that's really alive and moving with the music. So you can see on the left-hand one, the effect is mostly like the height map is affecting lights. So it makes it feel like it's a light show. Whereas on the right, it's much more up and down physical movement on something that's already quite high. So it feels like it's a heart that's beating or something like that. And you see different amounts of the fog or the sky or the 3D objects. Whereas on the left, it's more like you're going through a valley. And on the right, it's moving over a mountain. So this is the height map in action. So you can see the spins create these waves. Actually, I'll go back to show you what's happening. The spins all create these waves. The scratches create this ripple. The tap notes create these kind of larger dots on the earth. And the beats create these pulses out from the center. And in combination, it really comes alive. And you can see that here. Hopefully you can see the green through the video compression, but that's all of the procedural height things happening, which looks really cool. In terms of style, we've gone through so many iterations of styles. And yeah, we've settled on something that's very modular, very expensive, but still looks really nice. We've done a lot of handmade stuff. It's very annoying though, because if the length of a level changes, then like you have to move the handmade stuff. Changing the colors, it's very difficult to do. Handmade, if something gets slightly out of time for whatever reason, if like, as I said, the length of the level changes or you might sub in a different mix or something, you have to redo a lot of that. We want to avoid that. We want it to all be procedurally generated and still good looking. We also match every level to the album art of the track that it's representing. So yeah, it gives this real sense of like you're entering the music and just creating like a world that players can get into. So that's just some of the variety of levels we've come up with using this system. So on the bottom right, you can see it's a really kind of flat, gentle planet. And the other ones have combinations of different heights and things that make it feel like you're on all these different worlds. So accessibility is huge for us. We want to support as many players as possible being able to play the game. And the first way to do that is just support a lot of languages. I think for us, supporting eFigs is really standard. That's English, French, Italian, German, Spanish. Chinese, simplified and traditional. And for us, it was other really genre-specific languages. So rhythm games being huge in Korea and Japan, we supported those two languages. We actually supported Portuguese, Brazilian as well, because we were doing a lot of mobile beta tests in Brazil. So we just kind of had all those translation done. So we've continued to support that. it was really good for us to support Chinese and Japanese and Korean, because together I think that those three are like 22% of our market, because rhythm games are so big there. Even though our game is very much Western music, we've had a lot of players from Asia. Our approach to making accessibility features isn't so much like, how do we solve this colorblind problem or something like that. It's more, how do we create really cool features that everyone can use that solve accessibility problems. So I'll just go through what we actually support, and that is fully customizable note colors, which you can see happening on the top and bottom. So you can pretty much completely change the look of the game to whatever you want. And this solves all the colorblind problems. We basically just say, if you're red, green, change your reds or your greens. Or, if you want to make everything white for fun, you can do that too, or black or whatever you want. So it's a feature that everyone can use and have a good time with. And that adds a lot of value, I think. We've got simple backgrounds as well, which you can just turn off all of the reactivity, all of the colors, everything. It's just a dark background. So this is not only good for people with kind of visual kind of processing impairment, but also people who just want to focus on the notes. If you're playing tournament or something, or just going for a super high score and you don't want the distraction, it's good. It also saves on processing power, which is great. So it has multiple functions. We've got low feedback audio and visual. It's the same thing, minimizing distraction. Note speed overrides. So if you can't process the speed of XD notes, you can just do an override of the speed and just have it whatever speed you want. You can play everything at that speed. And a lot of people just do that because they prefer certain note speeds. Faster note speeds will mean people can probably hit things more accurately, I think, but it will mean it's harder to process what's coming at you. Slower is easier to process, but it's very hard to get it precise. So you just find your balance. We've got contrasting note designs too. So you can have the blues will all have kind of like thicker look and stars inside them and stuff. So very handy for that additional level of contrast. So I think if you're going to do these things, which I think you absolutely should, because people will ask for them, they will absolutely ask for them, and it will just mean you can have more players playing your game, more positive reviews. I think if you're going to go for this kind of stuff, you should design from day one with those features in mind, because we had to redo the way all of our notes were rendered. It was a lot of work to do the custom color system. We think it was absolutely worth it. But if we just from day one gone, let's make these notes, customizable, then it would have been a lot less work. Don't go too crazy with niche options though. You can really just spend a lot of time, trying to satisfy a very small number of people in the name of like just improving your game slightly. And it's just, you got to draw the line somewhere. So I think broad strokes is the best way you can do it. So the last thing I want to talk about is the early access experience we've had, and just generally tips for launching any game from what we've learned. I think the main thing is to actually have your Steam page ready when you start doing your marketing. So we didn't. We put out a tweet with sweet looking gameplay, playing New Game by Nitro Fun, and the tweet went ballistic. People were like, what is this? What is this? It went all around the world. We got hundreds of thousands of views and gained thousands of followers. It was insane, but we didn't have somewhere to actually direct people to wishlist the game. And that was a huge stuff up. I don't think we expected it to go so well. We just were like, let's just kind of do a reveal of what we've been working on. But just, you got to have everything ready just in case something goes viral. You know what I mean? We were fine in the end. I think we gained a big Twitter following, but Twitter's not really enough. It's kind of very easy to get lost in the noise. Unless you're doing it every day more than your competition, you won't get seen. So it's really a ton of work for not very much reward. I would say make sure you are done with core features before adding kind of side features that play off of those core features. So for us, it's stuff like scoring systems. I guess it was a big one. We just kind of, or like health systems or that kind of thing. So you'll have to redo everything if you have like a multiplayer mode or a challenge mode. So if we change our scoring system, which we did recently, we had to readjust how it worked in the multiplayer mode and how it worked in the challenge modes and all that. So like lock down those really core features early and you will save yourself so much iterative work. I'd say be very clear on what you plan to deliver. You can't be perfect with these things. It's really hard to predict how much work making a game is going to be. But I would say don't be afraid to cut things, but also just plan out really clearly what features you want in the game. Don't be afraid to cut them if you have to. But yeah, just let people know somehow. Let your fans know what your roadmap is. And just try and stick to your roadmap as well. It's way better than just kind of being in this early access swamp of like, is it ever going to get made? Is it ever going to get finished? Same with locking down your core design features. I would say lock down your visual style. We've gone through a lot of visual iteration and you kind of end up having to redo like press assets and trailers a lot just when visual things changes, because things can look out of date and it's very confusing messaging on your page to have like, what's this weird old looking game? Like it can look like a new mode or something that you don't know, but you have to say, oh, sorry, that's just an old this or that. And yeah, just lock down your visual style early and then work on your marketing stuff. User feedback, super important in early access. So we love getting feedback on Discord and we try to incorporate as much as we can. You can get a bit carried away with it, so don't obsess with it, but listen to your hardcore fans. Even though they're hardcore, they are like, they're a minority, but their kind of opinion is probably worth more. But I would say don't obsess over it because they are only representing a small portion of your player base. There are features that your most hardcore players wouldn't want because they don't need, stuff like good tutorials that are super important for the 98% of players that aren't hardcore. Read your reviews in all languages. I think we really just had a lot of negative reviews from Chinese players and I was just throwing them in Google Translate and I was like, what are they talking about? What is this, like the UI is bad? It must just be like they don't like the look of the game or something. And then I just actually changed the language to Chinese and I was like, oh man, it displays the characters so badly and they're all over the place and they're all different sizes, and we had to go through and change every kind of text string to be caps lined properly for Asian characters. And we haven't had a bad review, Chinese review, because of the UI since. And so, yeah, I would say just read all of your reviews and take them on board. Once again, don't obsess about them, but yeah. Another thing is like, don't be afraid to reach out to Steam. For us, we were very lucky to get a feature when we were doing an accessibility round, which you get 5 of during early access or during your game. And Steam just saw that we were doing one and put us on a daily deal, and it gave us a ton of exposure. And we were just kind of like, oh my God, what do we do? And we asked them and said, well, how did we get this? And they're like, oh, we just liked what you were doing. So about a year later, I contacted the same person who let us know originally that we'd been picked and said, is there any chance we could get another one? And they just said, sure, there's one coming up. Would you like to be a part of it? And all it took was us asking, and we got another similar feature. So build those relationships. Don't be afraid to just go to your Steam support thing and just ask someone, for some featuring. What do you have to lose? And that's all I have time for. But thank you so much. It's been a massive pleasure and an honor to talk at ChinaJoy. So if anyone has any questions, I'm sad I can't do Q&A because I love doing Q&As. But if you have any questions about anything, just send us an email, developer@superspin.digital. Thank you so much.